Tonight, our journey will not take us to the clamor of the battlefield or the formal halls of statecraft. We are not here to chart the rise and fall of empires or to analyze the strategies of forgotten generals. Instead, we are turning our gaze to a subject far more universal, yet one that history often renders in simple, predictable strokes. We are here to talk about love, but we will not be exploring the familiar tales of chivalry or the courtly romances you may already know. Our destination is a stranger place. We are venturing into the weirder side of ancient love stories. The word weird here does not mean shocking or startling. Think of it instead as unfamiliar, different, shaped by worlds that operated on rules and beliefs far removed from our own. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our first destination is a land born from the rhythm of a single life-giving river, a place where the gods were not distant figures, but active participants in the world of mortals, and where love was believed to be a force powerful enough to conquer even death itself. So take a slow, deep breath. Let the air fill your lungs and release it gently. There is nothing for you to do now but to listen and to drift down the slow, timeless current of the Nile. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the great river at dusk. The oppressive heat of the day has finally broken, replaced by a gentle, cooling breeze that rustles through the tall papyrus reeds lining the water's edge. The setting sun has painted the sky in hues of deep orange and soft violet, and the first stars are beginning to appear in the vast, cloudless expanse above. The world is bathed in a soft, ethereal light. This was the rhythm of ancient Egypt, a life dictated by the river's flood and retreat, a civilization that believed its world was a perfect, ordered reflection of a divine realm. And in this realm, the line between the human and the divine was not a solid wall, but a permeable veil. To the ancient Egyptians, love was not merely a human emotion. It was a cosmic force, an essential part of the principle of Ma'at, the fundamental order of harmony, justice, and truth that governed all of creation. And the most powerful love stories were those that crossed this veil, stories of divine desires that reached down into the world of mortals. The gods themselves were not imagined as serene, abstract beings. They lived and they loved with a passion that shaped the world. The tales told of them were not just cautionary fables. They were explanations for the very existence of things. The sky, the earth, the sun, the moon, all were personified as divine beings, bound together in a complex family of love, jealousy, and devotion. Mortals saw their own lives reflected in the gods, and in turn, saw the actions of the gods as a blueprint for their own. But this connection was more than just metaphorical. The Egyptians believed that their ruler, the pharaoh, was a living god on earth. He was the physical manifestation of the falcon god Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris. He was the intermediary between the people and the pantheon, the single point through which divine will flowed into the mortal world. This belief had a profound and, to our modern minds, deeply unusual effect on the concept of royal love and marriage. If the pharaoh was a god, his blood was divine. It was a sacred substance, too pure and potent to be diluted by mixing with that of a mere mortal. To preserve this divine essence, to maintain the cosmic order, it was not only accepted but often required for a pharaoh to marry within his own immediate family. The most common and most esteemed partner for a pharaoh was his own sister or half-sister. Imagine a royal court where the union of a brother and a sister is not a taboo to be whispered about, but a public celebration of divine purity. This was not seen as an act of personal affection, though love may well have been present. It was a sacred duty. The pharaoh's primary wife, the Nesu, or Great Royal Wife, held a position of immense religious and political importance. By marrying his sister, the pharaoh was ensuring that the next ruler, their son, would possess a bloodline of undiluted divinity. He was, in effect, marrying a goddess to produce a god. This practice created a closed loop of power and divinity, keeping the throne within a single family for generations. We see it time and again in the great dynasties. Pharaohs like Tutankhamun, the famous boy king, were the product of such unions. And he himself was married to his half-sister, Ankhesenamun. Their lives were dictated by this strange and sacred obligation, a form of love defined not by personal choice, but by cosmic necessity. It was a constant struggle to uphold Ma'at, and the royal marriage was the central pillar of that struggle. Of all the tales that shaped the Egyptian understanding of love, none was more powerful or more enduring than the story of the gods Isis and Osiris. This was not just a myth. It was the foundational story of their entire civilization, a blueprint for devotion, loss, and the ultimate triumph of love over the finality of death. Imagine a time at the dawn of creation. Osiris, the good and just king, ruled over Egypt with his beloved sister-wife Isis. Together, they were the perfect royal couple. Osiris taught humanity how to cultivate the land, how to create laws, and how to worship the gods. Isis, a goddess of great wisdom and magical power, taught women the arts of weaving, baking, and healing. Under their rule, the land of Egypt was a paradise, a place of peace and abundance. The rhythm of their life was one of perfect harmony. But a shadow of jealousy grew in the heart of their brother, Set. He was the god of the desert, of chaos and storms, and he coveted his brother's throne. Set devised a treacherous plan. He secretly measured Osiris's body and commissioned a magnificent chest to be made to those exact dimensions, crafted from the finest cedar and inlaid with gold and silver. During a great feast, Set brought forth the chest and announced that he would give it to whoever could fit inside it perfectly. One by one, the other gods tried, but none could fit. Then Osiris, unaware of the deception, stepped forward. He lay down in the chest, and it fit him as if it had been made for him. At that moment, Set and his co-conspirators slammed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and cast the chest into the Nile. The murder of Osiris was a cosmic catastrophe. The world was thrown out of balance. The light of the good king was extinguished, and chaos began to seep back into the land. When Isis learned of her husband's fate, she was overcome with a grief that shook the heavens. But her grief did not paralyze her. It galvanized her. Her love for Osiris transformed into a fierce, unwavering determination. She began a long and sorrowful journey, a desperate search for her beloved. Imagine her, disguised as an old woman, her divine radiance hidden beneath a cloak of mourning. She traveled the length of the Nile, questioning everyone she met, following the faintest of rumors. The reeds on the riverbank whispered clues to her. The animals of the desert guided her path. Her quest eventually led her out of Egypt and to the city of Byblos, in modern-day Lebanon. There she discovered that the chest had washed ashore and that a magnificent tamarisk tree had grown around it, encasing the coffin of her husband within its trunk. The king of Byblos, unaware of what the tree contained, had cut it down and used it as a pillar in his palace. Isis, through her wisdom and quiet persistence, gained the favor of the queen of Byblos and was eventually able to reveal her true identity and the nature of the pillar. The pillar was cut open, the chest was recovered, and Isis began her mournful journey back to Egypt, carrying the body of her husband. She hid the chest in the marshes of the Nile Delta, seeking a safe place to perform the sacred rites that could bring him back. But the vigilance of Set was absolute. While hunting in the marshes, he discovered the hidden chest. In a final, terrible rage, he tore his brother's body into 14 pieces and scattered them across the length and breadth of Egypt. This was a horrifying desecration, intended to ensure that Osiris could never be made whole, never find peace in the afterlife. For any other, this would have been the end. But for Isis, it was merely the beginning of a second, even more arduous quest. It became a journey of sorrowful reclamation. She fashioned a small boat from papyrus reeds and sailed into the vast, winding waterways of the delta, searching for every last piece of her husband. It was a monumental task, a pilgrimage of devotion. One by one she found them, and at the site of each discovery, it is said she established a temple in his honor. With the help of her sister, Nephthys, and the jackal-headed god Anubis, Isis painstakingly reassembled Osiris's body. Using her powerful magic and the sheer force of her love, she breathed life back into his form. Not a full return to the world of the living, but enough to conceive a child. In that moment, their son, Horus, was conceived. The heir who would one day challenge Set and restore order to the world. Osiris, now complete, could not remain in the land of the living. He descended into the underworld, the Duat, and became its eternal king. He became the judge of the dead, the symbol of resurrection and life after death. And so, the story of Isis and Osiris became the ultimate promise to every Egyptian. It taught them that death was not an end, but a transition, and that a love strong enough, a devotion pure enough, could ensure a reunion in the paradise of the afterlife. This profound belief in love beyond death permeated every aspect of Egyptian life, and it found its most tangible expression in their burial customs. Tombs were not seen as grim resting places, but as houses of eternity. For a husband and wife, the tomb was the home they would share for all time. They were often depicted together on the tomb walls, holding hands, embracing, or sharing a meal, their images intended to magically animate their spirits in the next world. The grave goods placed within the tomb were for their shared existence. They might include 2 chairs, 2 beds, 2 sets of dinnerware. Inscriptions would often express the deep bond between the couple. One moving text from a tomb speaks from the husband to his wife. "I am your own, a husband to whom you said, 'Forever and ever, my love for you runs through all my limbs.'" Even after death, the connection was believed to remain. There exists a collection of documents known as letters to the dead, written on papyrus scrolls or clay bowls. These were letters from a living spouse to their deceased partner, left at the tomb. In them, they might complain of family troubles, ask the deceased to intervene with the gods on their behalf, or simply express a deep and abiding loneliness. One widower writes to his dead wife, "Who is there that I can complain to? Complain to your mother and father on my behalf, who are in the necropolis. Let them intercede." It is a heartbreakingly human glimpse into a love that refused to accept the finality of the grave. This legacy of love as a strategic, divine, and eternal force found its final, spectacular expression in the life of the last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII. Moving from the world of myth to the world of documented history, we see in her story a conscious effort to embody the legends that came before her. Her famous romances with the 2 most powerful men of her time, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, were far more than simple affairs of the heart. They were masterpieces of political theatre and strategic seduction. Cleopatra saw herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. When she met Mark Antony, she did not simply arrange a political meeting. She orchestrated a spectacle designed to awe him and his Roman followers. She sailed up the river Cydnus to meet him not in a warship, but in a magnificent river barge. The barge had a gilded stern, purple sails, and silver oars that beat time to the music of flutes and lyres. She herself reclined under a golden canopy, dressed in the robes of Isis, surrounded by attendants dressed as nymphs and cupids. This was not just vanity, it was a calculated performance. She was presenting herself not as a client queen begging for Roman favor, but as a goddess coming to meet her divine consort. By linking her love for Antony to the mythological love of Isis for Osiris, she elevated their political alliance into something sacred, something destined. Her love stories were her most potent political weapon, an attempt to use the ancient power of divine desire to save her kingdom from the encroaching power of Rome. From the sacred duty of royal incest to the epic devotion of a goddess searching for her lost love, and from the quiet hope of reunion in the afterlife to the dazzling political theatre of Cleopatra, the Egyptian view of love was a complex tapestry. It was woven with threads of divinity, magic, strategy, and a profound belief that a true bond was a force of nature, as essential as the Nile itself, and as eternal as the stars in the desert sky. And in the deep quiet of the tomb, in the silent, painted gaze of a husband and wife, there is a final, whispered promise that love is the one thing you can take with you. In the quiet shade of an olive grove, with the gentle chirping of cicadas providing a steady, rhythmic hum, a Greek storyteller would not begin with a tale of harmony. He would begin with a warning about the power of the gods, the fragility of happiness, and the terrible price of looking back. No story better captures this delicate, tragic nature of Greek love than the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus was no ordinary mortal. He was the son of a muse, and his talent for music was a divine gift. When he sang and played his lyre, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Wild beasts would grow tame and lie at his feet. Trees would bend their branches to better hear his melodies. One day, while walking through the fields with her companions, Eurydice was pursued by a satyr. Fleeing from him, she did not see a venomous viper hidden in the tall grass. It struck her on the heel, and the poison worked swiftly. She fell, and her life slipped away. Her spirit descended into the dark, silent realm of the dead, the kingdom of Hades. The grief that fell upon Orpheus was as powerful as his music. The world, which had once seemed so full of life and song, became silent and grey. He put away his lyre, and his mourning was so profound that it touched the hearts of both gods and mortals. But like Isis before him, his grief was not passive. His love for Eurydice drove him to attempt the impossible. He resolved to do what no mortal had ever done before, to journey into the underworld while still alive and bring his beloved back. Imagine him now, his lyre in his hand, standing before the dark mouth of a cavern that led to the land of the dead. He began his descent, leaving the warm sunlit world behind and entering a realm of shadow and silence. His only weapon was his music. He played for Charon, the grim ferryman who carries the souls of the dead across the river Styx, and the ferryman was so moved that he carried Orpheus across without demanding payment. He played for Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed dog who guards the gates of Hades. The beast's terrifying growls softened into a quiet whimper, and it lay down, allowing him to pass. He walked through the asphodel meadows, where the shades of the dead wander like ghosts in a dream, and his beautiful, sorrowful music brought a moment of feeling back to their listless forms. Finally, he arrived at the throne of Hades, the dark king of the underworld, and his queen, Persephone. Here, in the heart of Death's kingdom, Orpheus began his plea. He did not beg or bargain, he simply sang. He sang of his love for Eurydice, of the joy she brought to the world, and of the crushing emptiness of his life without her. His music was so filled with love and sorrow that it moved the unmovable. Persephone, the queen who knew her own sorrow of being separated from the world above, wept. The Furies, the terrifying goddesses of vengeance, felt tears stream down their cheeks for the first time. Even the cold, hard heart of Hades himself was softened. He agreed to let Eurydice return to the world of the living, but he imposed one single, crucial condition. Orpheus was to walk ahead of her on the long path back to the surface, and he must not, under any circumstances, look back to see if she was following him. Not until they had both passed fully into the sunlight. The journey back began. Orpheus walked slowly, his heart filled with a mixture of soaring hope and agonizing doubt. He could hear no footsteps behind him. He could not feel her presence. The silence of the underworld was absolute. Was she truly there? Had Hades tricked him? The doubt grew with every step, a gnawing anxiety that began to overwhelm his faith. He climbed and climbed, the path growing steeper, the distant promise of light appearing far ahead. He was just steps from the threshold, the sunlight warming his face, when the doubt became unbearable. In a moment of human weakness, a moment of desperate, loving impatience, he turned around. He had to see her, and she was there, a faint, shadowy form just behind him. But as he looked upon her face, she began to fade. He had broken his vow. He saw a look of farewell in her eyes, a silent, sorrowful acceptance, before she was pulled back into the darkness, lost to him forever. He reached for her, but his hands grasped only empty air, a faint whisper. Farewell was the last thing he ever heard from her. The story of Orpheus is a profound exploration of love, loss, and the limits of human art. His love was strong enough to charm the gods of death, but his human doubt was enough to undo the miracle. It speaks to a core Greek idea, that our greatest strengths are often tied to our most tragic flaws. This theme of love for a creation, for an idealized form, takes a different turn in the story of Pygmalion. Pygmalion was a sculptor, a king of Cyprus, who was so disgusted by the perceived flaws and moral failings of the women around him that he vowed never to marry. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to his art. He decided to sculpt his ideal woman, a statue of perfect beauty and grace. He worked for months, pouring all of his skill and all of his longing into a single block of flawless ivory. He chipped and polished, and slowly, an image of breathtaking beauty emerged. The statue he created was so lifelike, so perfect in its form, that it seemed to be a real woman, merely sleeping. Pygmalion, the man who had scorned real women, fell hopelessly in love with his own creation. His love was strange and deeply solitary. He would speak to the statue, bring it gifts as a lover would, shells, smooth pebbles, songbirds, and flowers. He would dress it in fine silks and place rings on its cold, ivory fingers. He would lay it down on a soft couch and tuck it in with blankets, whispering to it as if it could hear. It was a one-sided love affair, a relationship with an object of his own making, a perfect but lifeless partner. His longing became so great that during the festival of the goddess Aphrodite, he went to her temple and prayed. He did not dare to ask that his statue be brought to life, but he humbly prayed that he might find a wife who was the living likeness of my ivory girl. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, heard his prayer and was touched by the sincerity of his strange devotion. She understood what he truly desired. When Pygmalion returned home, he went to his statue and, as he often did, gave it a gentle kiss. But this time, the ivory felt different. It was not cold, it felt warm. He kissed it again, and the lips seemed to soften under his. He placed his hands on its arms, and the ivory yielded to his touch, the flesh becoming soft and alive. A blush spread across its cheeks, and the statue opened its eyes, looking upon its creator and lover with wonder. Aphrodite had brought his creation to life. Pygmalion had found his perfect love, born not from the womb of a woman, but from his own artistic hands. The story of Pygmalion explores the nature of idealized love, the way we can fall in love with a concept of perfection. It's a gentler story than that of Orpheus, a fantasy of an artist whose creation literally comes to love him back. It speaks to a deep fascination with the line between art and life, and the power of love to bridge that gap. The Greeks, however, did not confine their explorations of love to myth. They also dissected it with philosophical rigor. In Plato's Symposium, we find one of the most sophisticated and enduring discussions of love ever written. The setting is a dinner party in Athens, where a group of intellectuals, including the philosopher Socrates, decide to each give a speech in praise of Eros, the god of love. The speeches reveal a spectrum of views. One speaker describes love as a force that inspires virtue, arguing that an army made up of lovers would be invincible, as no man would ever show cowardice in front of the one he loves. Another speaker, Aristophanes, tells a strange and wonderful origin story for humanity. He claims that humans were originally round, with 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 faces. They were so powerful that they threatened the gods. So Zeus, to humble them, split them in half. Ever since, each half has been searching the world for its other half, and love is that deep, primal longing to be made whole again. This story accounts for all forms of love, as some of these original beings were male, some female, and some male-female. This highlights an important aspect of love in ancient Greece. While marriage between a man and a woman was a social and economic necessity for producing heirs, a powerful emotional and intellectual bond between 2 men was seen as a high and noble form of love. It was often a mentorship relationship where an older, respected citizen would guide a younger man in matters of philosophy, politics, and virtue. This bond, celebrated in philosophy and practiced in society, was considered a powerful force for personal and social good. The divine world of the Greeks reflected this spectrum of desire, often in chaotic ways. Zeus, the king of the gods, was infamous for his many affairs. His love was a rapacious, transformative force. To pursue the objects of his desire, he would change his shape, becoming a swan, a bull, a shower of gold, or even the husband of the woman he sought to seduce. His love stories are not gentle romances. They are tales of divine power and irresistible impulse, often with tragic consequences for the mortal women he pursued. This variety of belief found its way into the diverse marriage customs across the Greek city-states. In Athens, a respectable girl was kept in seclusion until she was married off in her early teens, often to a man twice her age whom she had never met. The marriage was a business contract between her father and her new husband. In stark contrast was the warrior society of Sparta. Spartan women were encouraged to be physically fit and were given far more freedom than their Athenian counterparts. The marriage customs were peculiar and ritualistic. A man would abduct his bride by force, a symbolic act, as the match was pre-arranged. On the wedding night, the bride would have her head shaved, be dressed in men's clothes and left in a dark room. The groom would sneak away from his military barracks, spend a short time with her, and then return to his post, all in secret. This secrecy was intended to keep the passion between them high, and the focus of the men firmly on their military duties. It was a form of love structured entirely around the needs of the state. From the tragic artist to the lovesick sculptor, from the philosopher's inquiry to the strange customs of the city-state, the Greek view of love was a brilliant, multifaceted prism. It reflected a world that was fascinated by the power of human passion, deeply aware of its potential for both creation and destruction, and forever wrestling with the desires of its unpredictable and all too human gods. It was a love that was heroic, tragic, philosophical, and deeply weird. At the pinnacle of the Roman world sat the emperor. He was not just a ruler, he was the paterfamilias, the symbolic father of the entire Roman family. He was expected to be the living embodiment of Roman virtue, dignity, self-control, and respect for tradition. But when this absolute power fell into the hands of a man who cared for none of these things, the results were profoundly strange. Such was the case with the Emperor Nero. Nero's reign is remembered as one of excess, artistry, and terrifying cruelty. He saw himself not as a statesman, but as a performer. The world was his stage, and the Roman people his captive audience. His personal life became a shocking public performance, and his relationships were a deliberate subversion of every Roman ideal. Perhaps the most unsettling of his relationships was his marriage to a young boy named Sporus. Sporus was a freedman who bore a striking resemblance to Nero's recently deceased wife, the Empress Poppaea Sabina, a wife whose death many Romans, rightly or wrongly, attributed to a kick from Nero himself. In a fit of what seems to have been a morbid and twisted form of grief or remorse, Nero ordered Sporus to be made into a living replica of his dead empress. This was an act of unspeakable cruelty, performed with all the formality of the state. The boy was subjected to castration, a brutal procedure intended to preserve his youthful features and voice. He was then dressed in the fine silks and adorned with the priceless jewels of an empress. Nero staged a public wedding ceremony, complete with a dowry and a bridal veil. Sporus was declared Nero's wife, and in public, the emperor treated him as such, with kisses and displays of affection that horrified the stoic Roman elite. This was not a marriage in any sense we would understand. It was a grotesque display of absolute power, a demonstration that the emperor could not only kill, but he could also unmake and remake a human being according to his whims. It was a love story born from obsession and loss, twisted into a horrifying public spectacle. As if to demonstrate his contempt for all convention, Nero staged another wedding, this time to a man from his inner circle named Pythagoras. But in this ceremony, Nero himself took on the role of the bride. He, the emperor of Rome, the ultimate symbol of masculine authority, wore the bridal veil. He submitted to a public ceremony where another man was his husband. To the Romans, this was perhaps even more shocking than his marriage to Sporus. For a Roman man, especially an emperor, to willingly take the passive, submissive role in any relationship was a profound degradation. It was a voluntary surrender of his dignitas, his essential authority. Nero's act was a deliberate inversion of the natural order, a piece of performance art designed to show that he was bound by no rules, not even those of gender and power. His affairs were not about love, but about the terrifying freedom that comes when one man has no one left to tell him no. While the emperor's peculiarities were on public display, the common Roman navigated the turbulent waters of love in a much more private and often more desperate way. For those without absolute power, life was uncertain. Crops could fail, fevers could strike, and lovers could be unfaithful. In a world where they felt little control, many turned to magic, to the secret, hidden arts of compulsion. Imagine a quiet room, lit by a single flickering oil lamp. A person, perhaps a man whose love is unrequited, or a woman who fears her husband is straying, sits hunched over a small, thin sheet of lead. The lead is cool and heavy in their hands. With a sharp stylus, they begin to scratch a message into the soft metal. This is a defixio, a curse tablet, a secret appeal to the spirits of the underworld. The inscriptions on these tablets, hundreds of which have been found by archaeologists, are a window into the raw emotions of Roman life. They are not eloquent poems. They are demands. A lover might curse a rival by name, asking the spirits to bind his limbs, to silence his tongue, to make him unable to perform in any way. I curse Tretia Maria, one such tablet reads, asking that she be unable to speak or act against the one who cast the spell. The language of the curse was often intentionally twisted. Words might be written backwards, or in strange magical symbols, in the belief that this secret language was better understood by the spirits. Once the message was complete, the person would drive a nail through the center of the lead sheet. This was a powerful symbolic act. Just as the nail physically pierced the lead, the curse was intended to fix or bind the victim. The final step was to deposit the tablet in a place believed to have a connection to the underworld. It might be dropped into a sacred spring, a deep well, or, most potently, hidden within a fresh grave. The belief was that the spirit of the newly deceased would carry the message down to the chthonic gods who could enact the curse. It was a dark and secret form of communication, a desperate attempt to control the affections of another through supernatural force. Love was also pursued through charms and potions. Amulets were worn to attract a lover or ensure their fidelity. Potions, made from a frightening array of ingredients, herbs, insects, and parts of animals, were secretly administered, in the hope that desire could be magically instilled, like a sickness. For the ordinary Roman, love was a battlefield, and magic was a hidden weapon. Yet, Alongside this dark undercurrent of magical coercion, we find evidence of love that was public, boastful, and touchingly human. The walls of Pompeii, preserved for millennia under a blanket of volcanic ash, have given us an intimate and uncensored look at the daily chatter of a Roman town. The walls were a public message board, and on them, people scribbled advertisements, political slogans, insults, and most frequently, declarations of love. Walking through the silent streets of Pompeii today is like reading a city's diary. The graffiti gives a voice to the voiceless. We hear from a weaver named Successus, who proudly scrawls, "Successus the weaver loves Iris, the innkeeper's slave girl. She, however, does not love him, but he begs her to have pity on him." We hear from a woman named Sabina, who writes, "To the one who is dragging his feet, goodbye." We feel the simple affection in the message. Restitutus has deceived many girls, and the quiet satisfaction in another, Virgula to her Tertius, "You are a nasty fellow." These are not the words of poets or emperors. They are the voices of weavers, slave girls, soldiers, and tavern keepers. They are small, fleeting expressions of affection, jealousy, heartbreak, and lust, a quiet testament to the fact that for all of Rome's grandeur, life was lived and love was felt in these small, everyday moments. This tension between public duty and private desire reached its most extreme form in one of Rome's most sacred institutions, the Vestal Virgins. These 6 priestesses were among the most honored women in Rome. Their duty was to tend the sacred fire of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, in her temple in the Roman Forum. This fire was believed to be intrinsically linked to the continuation of the Roman state. If it went out, it was a terrifying omen of impending disaster. To serve the goddess, these women were chosen in childhood and took a solemn 30-year vow of chastity. In exchange, they were granted extraordinary privileges. They were freed from the authority of their fathers, they could own property and write their own wills, and their person was sacrosanct, but the vow was absolute. Their purity was directly connected to the purity and safety of Rome itself. For a Vestal virgin to engage in a forbidden romance was not a personal failing. It was a religious crime of the highest order, a form of treason against the gods. The punishment for breaking this vow was severe and steeped in horrifying ritual. Because her blood was sacred, it could not be spilled. So, a Vestal found guilty of unchastity was condemned to be buried alive. Imagine the grim, silent procession. The condemned priestess would be dressed in funereal robes and carried through the city in a closed litter, as if she were already a corpse. She would be taken to a place called the Campus Sceleratus, the evil field, where an underground chamber had been prepared. Inside was a small couch, a lamp, and a meager portion of bread, water, milk, and oil. The priestess would descend into the chamber. The entrance would be sealed above her, and the earth would be leveled, leaving no trace. Her lover would be publicly flogged to death in the Forum. It was a terrifying reminder that in Rome, the needs of the state and the perceived will of the gods could extinguish love and life in the most brutal way imaginable. But Roman life was not all curses and punishments. In the quiet, lamplit world of an elite dinner party, the convivium, we see a more sophisticated, playful side of love. Imagine yourself reclining on a soft couch in a beautifully decorated room, the triclinium. The air is scented with flowers and incense. The only light comes from dozens of flickering oil lamps, casting a warm golden glow on the frescoes that adorn the walls. You can hear the gentle bubbling of a fountain in the nearby atrium and, in the distance, the soft, melancholic notes of a flute. Here, surrounded by lavish displays of food and wine, Roman men and women mingled. Love poems, like those of Ovid in his Ars Amatoria, were essentially instruction manuals for how to conduct a flirtation at such a party. He gives advice on how to secure a seat next to the object of your affection, how to offer her wine, how to praise her singing. He suggests using a spilled drop of wine on the polished table to write a silent message, or how to let your fingers touch, just for a moment, when passing a cup. This was a world of subtle glances, coded words, and quiet gestures. A sophisticated game of seduction played out under the warm, watchful glow of candlelight. The Roman approach to love was therefore a study in contrasts. It could be as grand and as brutally strange as an emperor's whim, as secret as a curse buried in a grave, as public as a scrawl on a city wall, and as controlled as the sacred vow of a priestess. It was a force that was celebrated in poetry, but also feared, managed, and, when necessary, ruthlessly contained by the immense, unyielding weight of Roman law and tradition. Our first destination is ancient India, a land of deep spiritual inquiry and a culture that celebrated the physical body not as a source of shame, but as a vehicle for transcendence. In the West, we often encounter the idea of a conflict between the spirit and the flesh. In ancient Indian thought, this was not necessarily so. The physical world, including the pleasures of love, was often seen as a legitimate path to understanding the divine. Nowhere is this more intricately detailed than in the famous text known as the Kama Sutra. Today, the Kama Sutra is often misunderstood in the West as a simple, perhaps even scandalous manual of exotic physical positions. To see it only in this way is to miss its true purpose and its profound depth. Attributed to the sage Vatsyayana and likely composed sometime between the 2nd and 4th centuries CE, the Kama Sutra is not just about karma, which means desire or pleasure. It is a sutra, a guide to living a virtuous, gracious, and well-rounded life. Imagine an educated urban gentleman in ancient India, a Nagaraka. The Kama Sutra was written for him. It was a guide to being a sophisticated, cultured, and successful man. Only one part of the text deals directly with the techniques of physical love. The rest of the book is a detailed exploration of what it means to live a life of pleasure and refinement. It contains chapters on how to acquire knowledge, how to manage one's finances, and how to furnish one's home elegantly. It gives advice on personal grooming, on the art of conversation, on how to choose a wife, and how to conduct oneself in society. The text presents love as an art form, something to be studied and practiced with the same dedication as music or poetry. It encourages both men and women to be learned in the 64 arts, or kalas. These arts include not just singing and dancing, but also skills like magic, chemistry, flower arranging, and even carpentry. The ideal lover was not just a passionate partner, but an interesting and accomplished one. But the most weird aspect of the Kama Sutra, from a modern Western perspective, is its scientific and almost detached approach to the act of love itself. It categorizes everything. It describes different types of men and women based on their physical attributes and their passion. It details different kinds of embraces, different kinds of kisses, and yes, the many different postures for physical union. This is not presented with a sense of titillation, but with a calm, analytical tone. It is a science of pleasure, an attempt to understand and master the physical language of love in all its variations, in order to enhance the connection between two people. Love, in this context, was not a chaotic, overwhelming passion that one simply fell into. It was a skill. It was a practice. The Kama Sutra taught that a harmonious physical relationship was essential for a harmonious spiritual and emotional one. It was a holistic approach, where body and soul were not in conflict, but were partners on the same journey towards a fulfilling life. Enlur. Let us now travel further east, to the ancient world of China under the yellow sky. Here, the worldview was shaped not by a pantheon of passionate gods, but by a deep reverence for ancestors and a belief in the importance of social harmony and the continuation of the family line. Love was a serious matter, tied inextricably to duty and family. Yet, even within this highly structured society, we find one of the most unusual and enduring romantic customs, the ghost marriage. Imagine a young couple betrothed since childhood. They have grown up with the knowledge that they will one day be husband and wife, their families bound by this promise. But before the wedding can take place, the young man suddenly dies. He has passed into the spirit world without a wife, without a descendant to honor him at the family altar. For his family, this is not just a tragedy, it is a cosmic imbalance. An unmarried spirit is a restless spirit, one that could bring misfortune to the living. To rectify this, the family would proceed with the wedding as planned. They would seek out the young woman who had been his betrothed, and they would conduct a full marriage ceremony. The bride would wear her red wedding dress. The groom's family would carry a white cockerel, a symbol of his spirit, or perhaps a bamboo effigy dressed in his clothes. She would marry the effigy, becoming his wife in the eyes of the family and the spirit world. From that day forward, she was a widow, but she was also a respected wife. She would move into her husband's family home, perform the duties of a daughter-in-law, and most importantly, she would be responsible for tending to his ancestral tablet. She was the guardian of his memory. In some cases, the family might even allow her to adopt an heir from one of her husband's brothers, so that the dead man's family line could officially continue. This was not a symbolic act. It was believed to be a very real marriage. The bride was now spiritually connected to her husband. It was thought that he would watch over her and protect her from the spirit world. In return, she ensured his peace and his proper place among the ancestors. It was a love story built on duty, a commitment that transcended the boundary of life and death, ensuring harmony for both the living and the dead. This deep sense of longing, of a connection that crosses immense voids, is also found in the quiet, contemplative world of Chinese poetry. Let us listen for a moment to the voice of the great Tang Dynasty poet, Li Bai. He was a wanderer, a romantic figure who often wrote of nature, of wine, and of a deep, pervasive sense of longing. Imagine him sitting alone on a moonlit night by the bank of a wide, silent river. The moon is a perfect, brilliant disk, its reflection shimmering on the dark water. For Li Bai, the moon is not just a celestial body, it is a distant, silent companion, a symbol of a beauty that can be seen but never touched. One of his most famous poems captures this feeling. Beside my bed, the bright moonbeams gleam, almost as if the frost is on the ground. I lift my head and gaze at the bright moon. I lower my head and think of my old home. This is a quiet, simple expression of a deep emotional state. It is a love for a place, a longing for a connection that has been lost. The legend of Li Bai's death, though likely untrue, perfectly encapsulates his romantic spirit. It is said that he was drunkenly sailing on a river one night, and seeing the moon's beautiful reflection in the water, he leaned over to embrace it, fell in, and drowned. It is a story of a lover trying to physically grasp an illusion, a romantic soul consumed by his own longing for an unattainable beauty. Let us take one final step on our journey, back in time, to the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the land of ancient Mesopotamia. Here, in the cradle of civilization, we find some of the earliest written expressions of love, and they are surprisingly passionate and direct. The Sumerians worshipped a pantheon of powerful gods, and one of their most important deities was the goddess Inanna, known later as Ishtar. Inanna was a goddess of stark and powerful contradictions. She was the goddess of love, sensuality, and procreation, but she was also the goddess of war and political power. She was not a gentle, nurturing mother figure. She was a fierce, ambitious, and demanding deity. The hymns written to her are some of the most beautiful and erotic love poems to survive from the ancient world. They were written as part of a sacred marriage rite, a ritual in which the king of the Sumerian city-state would symbolically take on the role of the shepherd god Dumuzi, Inanna's consort. The king would, in a sacred ceremony, become the husband of the goddess herself. This ritual was believed to ensure the fertility of the land, the health of the livestock, and the prosperity of the entire kingdom for the coming year. Imagine a high priestess, representing the goddess, reciting these hymns. Her voice rings out in the grand temple, filled with the scent of cedar and incense. The poetry is explicit in its celebration of the body and desire. Inanna speaks, and her words are filled with a joyous and unapologetic sensuality. She says, "My beloved, the delight of my eyes, your charm is sweet, I have tasted it. My darling, you are dear to my heart." She speaks of her own body as a fertile field, ready to be ploughed. "My uncultivated land, my virgin land. I, the maiden, will plough it myself, my own vulva, the well-watered ground. I, the queen, will be its caretaker." This is not love as a metaphor or love as a quiet domestic arrangement. This is sacred, erotic love as the engine of creation itself. The union of the goddess and her consort was the most important event of the year, a moment of cosmic regeneration. The love they celebrated was powerful, life-giving, and essential to the survival of their world. It was a love that was both deeply personal and cosmically significant, a holy union that ensured the rhythm of life would continue. From the analytical artistry of the Kama Sutra to the dutiful commitment of a ghost marriage and the sacred life-giving passion of a Mesopotamian goddess, the societies beyond the West offer us a vast and varied landscape of love. They remind us that the ways in which we structure our affections, our duties, and our desires are not universal. Each culture creates its own unique and intricate answers to the fundamental questions of the human heart. Imagine a world painted in shades of green and grey. The air is damp, carrying the scent of wet earth, wood smoke, and the distant, salty tang of the sea. There are no grand stone cities here, but fortified hill forts, ringed with earthen ramparts, and scattered farming settlements made of timber and thatch. Life is lived closer to the seasons, and love, like life, is a more rugged and pragmatic affair, yet deeply intertwined with magic, prophecy, and personal honour. In the Celtic world, particularly in ancient Ireland, marriage was not always the permanent, lifelong contract we might imagine. The sophisticated legal system, known as the Brehon Laws, recognized more than 10 different kinds of unions, reflecting a society with a remarkably flexible and practical approach to relationships. The most formal marriage was a union between social equals, with property contributed from both sides. But the laws also accounted for trial marriages. One such arrangement was the handfasting, a tradition that has seen a modern revival. Imagine a couple standing before their tribe, perhaps near a sacred standing stone or an ancient oak tree. They would clasp hands, and a druid or chieftain would bind their hands together with a cord or ribbon, symbolizing their union. This was not necessarily a vow for all eternity. It was often a commitment for a year and a day. During this trial period, the couple would live as husband and wife. It was a test of compatibility, a time to see if they could build a life together, if their household would prosper, and if they were fertile. At the end of the year and a day, they could choose to make the union permanent, or they could choose to part ways with no social stigma attached. The laws were clear on how to divide any property they had acquired or any children they had produced. It was a love built on practicality, an acknowledgement that a lifelong bond was best entered into with open eyes. The Irish laws also granted women a surprising degree of power and autonomy within a marriage. A woman's property remained her own. She was her husband's legal equal in many respects. If her husband wronged her, she had the right to seek a divorce and take her entire contribution to the marriage with her. The grounds for divorce were extensive and practical. A husband who was too fat to perform his marital duties, one who gossiped about their private life, or one who struck her could all be divorced. It was a system that valued harmony and fairness, and it provided women with a level of protection and agency almost unheard of in the Roman or Greek worlds we have visited. But Celtic love was not all legal codes and practical arrangements. It was also a thing of wild, mythic passion, a force that could defy kings and unravel kingdoms. This is the world of the great tragic romances, like the story of Deirdre of the Sorrows. It was prophesied at Deirdre's birth that her beauty would be so great it would bring death and destruction to the kingdom of Ulster. To avert this fate, King Conchobar mac Nessa, the ruler of Ulster, had her raised in total seclusion, intending to marry her himself when she came of age, keeping her beauty and the curse it carried under his control. But Deirdre grew up wild and willful. One day, she saw a raven land in the snow with its prey, a splash of blood on the pure white. She declared that she would only love a man whose hair was as black as the raven, whose skin was as white as the snow, and whose cheeks were as red as the blood. Her guardian told her that such a man existed, Noas, a handsome young warrior in the king's service. Deirdre arranged a secret meeting with Noas, and they fell instantly in love. Knowing the king's plan, they had no choice but to flee. Along with Noas's two brothers, they escaped across the sea to Scotland, living a simple, hunted life in the wilderness. For several years, they lived in a state of idyllic happiness, a love born from defiance. But King Conchobar's pride could not let the insult stand. He sent a messenger with a false promise of forgiveness, luring them back to Ireland. Despite Deirdre's prophetic visions of their doom, Noas's honour demanded that he trust his king's word. They returned, and the king's trap was sprung. Naus and his brothers were ambushed and killed. Deirdre was captured and forced to live as the king's wife for a year. Throughout that time, she never smiled. Her grief was a silent, unyielding rebellion. Finally, the king, enraged by her sorrow, asked her what she hated most in the world. She replied, "You, and the man who killed Noas." The king then decided to give her to his son's killer as a prize. As she was being taken away in a chariot, Deirdre threw herself from it, striking her head against a stone and ending her life. Her love was a force so absolute that she could not live in a world without it. It was a love defined by tragedy, a story that served as a warning about the destructive power of passion when it clashes with the pride of kings. If we travel from the green hills of Ireland to the cold grey fjords of Scandinavia, we find a similar world of honour, kinship, and epic love. The Norse sagas are filled with tales of love, but it is rarely a gentle or happy emotion. It is a catalyst, a force that drives feuds, inspires poetry, and leads to acts of both sublime heroism and brutal vengeance. In the Norse world, marriage was, like in many societies, a strategic alliance between families. But the emotional bond between a husband and wife, or between lovers, could become a powerful and destabilizing force. Consider the story of Brynhilda, the Valkyrie. Brynhilda was a supernatural warrior maiden, a servant of Odin. For an act of disobedience, she was punished by being cast into a deep, magical sleep, surrounded by a ring of fire on a remote mountaintop. Odin decreed that she could only be woken by a hero brave enough to ride through the flames. The hero Sigurd, the greatest of all Norse heroes, accomplished this feat. He rode through the fire, woke the sleeping Valkyrie, and they fell deeply in love, pledging themselves to each other. Sigurd gave her a ring as a token of their betrothal before he rode away, promising to return. But the threads of fate, the weave of the Norns, were already tangled. Through magic and deception, Sigurd was tricked into forgetting Brynhilda. He was given a potion that wiped his memory of her, and he was married instead to a princess named Gudrun. Later, Sigurd was further tricked into helping Gudrun's brother Gunnar win the hand of Brynhilda for himself. Gunnar was unable to ride through the ring of fire, so Sigurd, using magic to take on Gunnar's appearance, rode through the flames a second time. He won Brynhilda for another man, and, while disguised, he took back the ring he had once given her. Brynhilda, believing Sigurd had betrayed her, and now married to a man she did not love, was consumed by a grief that curdled into a burning rage. Her love for Sigurd was so absolute that its betrayal demanded an equally absolute vengeance. She incited her husband Gunnar to murder Sigurd, revealing the secret of his one vulnerable spot. After Sigurd was killed, Brynhilda's rage turned back into sorrow. With her love dead and her own life now empty of meaning, she had only one path left. As Sigurd's body was placed on a great funeral pyre, she walked into the flames, ending her own life so that she could be united with the only man she had ever loved in death. It is a story of love as a cataclysmic force, a passion so intense that it cannot be contained by oaths, by magic, or by the bonds of marriage, leaving only destruction in its wake. This was love in the Iron Age North. It was practical enough to allow for trial marriages, and passionate enough to bring down kingdoms. It was a love bound by solemn oaths, but one that could be shattered by pride and fate. It was a force celebrated in the intricate verses of the Skalds and whispered in the flickering firelight of the Longhouse, a constant reminder that in a world of hardship and honor, the human heart was the wildest territory of all. We have seen how love can be a force of epic, tragic passion, but love can also manifest in quieter, more subtle ways. It can be a game of hidden meanings, a dance of propriety, a force governed not by magical curses or heroic oaths, but by the immensely powerful weight of social expectation. Let us now travel to a world of exquisite refinement and delicate beauty, a place where emotions were rarely expressed directly, but were instead communicated through the tilt of a fan, the color of a robe, or the carefully chosen words of a poem written on scented paper. We are entering the world of Heian-kyo, the capital of Japan during the Heian period, which flourished from the late 8th to the late 12th century. This was a golden age of art and literature, a society dominated by a small, insulated court aristocracy, whose lives were a constant performance of taste and elegance. Imagine a world constructed almost entirely of wood, paper, and silk. The imperial court at Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto, was not a place of stone castles and fortified walls. It was a sprawling complex of open-sided pavilions, connected by covered walkways, and surrounded by meticulously cultivated gardens. Life was lived indoors, in spaces divided not by solid walls, but by beautifully painted folding screens and translucent paper shoji panels. This was a world of shadows, of filtered light, and of constant observation. And within this rarefied atmosphere, a unique and deeply aesthetic culture of courtship evolved. For a high-ranking lady of the Heian court, life was one of privileged seclusion. She would spend most of her days in the dimly lit inner rooms of her family's residence, hidden from the view of unrelated men behind elaborate screens or bamboo blinds. Her world was a small one, but it was one of intense refinement. She would learn to play the koto, a long stringed instrument, to practice calligraphy with a graceful hand, and to master the complex art of blending incense. But her most important skill was her taste, her ability to choose and layer the colors of her robes. The Juni Haito, or 12-layered robe, was a direct expression of her sensibility and status. Each layer of silk was a different shade, and the combination of colors at her collar and sleeves had to be perfectly harmonious, reflecting not just her personal taste, but the specific season of the year. Because a lady was almost never seen directly by a potential suitor, courtship was a game of hints and glimpses. A gentleman might be visiting her father and happen to catch a brief, fleeting sight of her sleeve, with its perfectly chosen colors peeking from behind a screen. Or he might hear the sound of her koto drifting from the inner rooms. This would be enough to spark his interest. The courtship would then begin, not with a face-to-face conversation, but with a letter. But this was no simple note. The letter itself was an art object, a test of the gentleman's taste and sincerity. He would select a piece of paper, often exquisitely decorated and subtly perfumed with his personal blend of incense. On this paper he would write a poem, usually a short 31-syllable waka. The poem would not be a direct declaration of love, but an elegant, elusive expression of his feelings, often using a metaphor from nature: the dew on a blade of grass, the cry of a deer in the mountains. His choice of paper, the quality of his calligraphy, the elegance of his verse, and even the type of flower or branch he chose to attach to the folded letter, all of it was a message. It was a demonstration of his worthiness. The lady, upon receiving the letter, would be judged by her response. She, too, would choose a beautiful piece of paper, write a reply in an equally elegant poetic form, and send it back with her own lady-in-waiting. This exchange of poems could go on for some time, a delicate literary flirtation, a way of getting to know another's soul without ever having looked upon their face. If the gentleman proved his taste and his poetic skill, he might eventually be granted a visit. But even this was not a simple meeting. He would arrive at the lady's residence late at night. He would be led to the veranda outside her private rooms, and he would remain outside, while she remained hidden behind her screen of state. They would speak for hours, their voices passing through the barrier that separated them. It was a conversation in near darkness, a union of voices and minds. If this conversation went well, and if the lady was amenable, the gentleman might finally be invited to slip behind the screen. Their union would be a quiet, secretive affair, but it was governed by a strict and elegant etiquette. The gentleman was expected to leave before dawn. His departure was as important as his arrival. As he left, he was expected to compose and send a morning after poem, a beautiful verse lamenting the shortness of the night and the sorrow of parting. The lady's reply was equally crucial. A failure to send this poetic exchange would be a terrible breach of decorum, signaling that the affair was a crude, purely physical encounter rather than a relationship of refined sensibility. This entire culture is captured in breathtaking detail in one of the world's first novels, The Tale of Genji, written in the early 11th century by a court lady, Murasaki Shikibu. The novel follows the life and many loves of its hero, the shining prince Genji. Genji is the perfect Heian courtier, impossibly handsome, a brilliant poet, a master of music and dance, and a man of exquisite taste. His love affairs are the engine of the novel, but they are often filled with a characteristic Heian melancholy, a sense of the impermanence of all things. This feeling was known as mono no aware, the pathos of things. It was a gentle sadness, a bittersweet awareness that beauty is fleeting and that all love must eventually face loss and the passage of time. One of Genji's most poignant and strange love affairs is with a woman named Lady Fujitsubo. She is his father's new young empress, and she bears a striking resemblance to Genji's own deceased mother, whom he barely knew. Genji becomes obsessed with her, a love that is both forbidden by law and complicated by a deep psychological longing for his lost mother. Their love affair is conducted in absolute secrecy, through whispered conversations in darkened corridors and clandestine meetings. It is a love heavy with guilt and the constant fear of discovery. Genji's passion for Fujitsubo is a violation of his duty to his father, the emperor. The affair eventually results in the birth of a son, who everyone at court, including the emperor himself, believes is the emperor's heir. But Genji and Fujitsubo know the truth. The boy is Genji's son, the product of their forbidden love. The future emperor of Japan is illegitimate, and this terrible secret lies at the heart of the court, shaping the lives of everyone involved. Genji is haunted by his transgression for the rest of his life. He sees the karmic consequences of his actions played out in his own later loves. When he takes a young girl named Murasaki as his ward and raises her to be his ideal wife, she is later pursued by other men, causing him immense pain, a pain he recognizes as a form of divine retribution for his own sin against his father. Love in the tale of Genji is not a simple romance. It is a complex web of aesthetic performance, psychological longing, forbidden desire, and karmic consequence. It is a love that is almost inseparable from a sense of beauty and a profound sense of sadness. The greatest lovers are not the most heroic, but the most sensitive, the most attuned to the quiet, heartbreaking beauty of a fleeting moment. The world of the Heian court was a small, closed, and intensely artificial one, but it produced a culture of love that was perhaps unique in its focus on subtlety and taste. It was a love that was communicated not through grand declarations, but through the color of a sleeve, the scent of a letter, and the perfect, elegant turn of a 5-line verse. A quiet and beautiful dance conducted in a world of shadows. We have traveled from the sacred halls of pharaohs to the shadowy pavilions of the Heian court. We have heard the curses of Roman lovers and the epic sagas of the Norse. Throughout our journey, we have seen how love, while a universal human experience, has been shaped and expressed in profoundly different ways. But our exploration would be incomplete if we did not consider one final crucial element: the ways in which societies have tried to teach, to guide, and sometimes to contain this powerful force through law, philosophy, and social pressure. Let us now turn our attention to the frameworks of love. We will not focus on a single culture, but on the intellectual and legal structures that underpinned some of the societies we have visited. This is a look at the rule books, the official and unofficial guides to desire, marriage, and the complicated business of the human heart. Imagine a young Roman nobleman in the 1st century CE. He is educated, wealthy, and eager to make his way in the sophisticated and often treacherous social world of the capital. He wishes to be successful in love, but the rules are not always clear. For him, a book like Ovid's Ars Amatoria, or The Art of Love, would not have been a piece of scandalous literature to be read in secret. It would have been a practical, if slightly risque, guidebook. Ovid's work is a fascinating and weirdly methodical dissection of seduction. He approaches the art of finding and keeping a lover with the precision of a military strategist, combined with the flair of a poet. He gives his reader, the aspiring lover, detailed and practical advice. Where should one go to meet potential partners? Ovid suggests the colonnades of the public porticos, the law courts, and especially the Circus Maximus during a chariot race. The close-packed seating, he notes, provides an excellent opportunity to strike up a conversation. His advice is startlingly specific. He suggests helping the woman next to you by brushing some dust from her robe, or using a fan to create a gentle breeze for her. He advises on personal hygiene: keep your fingernails clean, your nostrils free of hair, and your breath fresh. He teaches how to use flattery, how to write convincing love letters, and how to feign passion, even when you may not feel it. But perhaps the strangest part of Ovid's work is its cold, almost clinical detachment. He treats love not as a matter of the heart, but as a game of skill and deception. He advises men to weep, if necessary, to convince a woman of their sincerity. Tears are useful, he writes matter-of-factly. With tears you can melt steel. He is teaching the performance of love, not the feeling itself. The book was a sensation, but it also proved dangerous for its author. The Emperor Augustus, who was trying to promote a return to traditional Roman family values, saw Ovid's work as a direct affront to his moral reforms. The Ars Amatoria was cited as one of the reasons for Ovid's eventual exile to a remote outpost on the Black Sea. It was a stark reminder that even the most playful and poetic attempts to codify love could clash with the immense power of the state. The rules of love in Rome were ultimately subject to the rules of the emperor. This tension between personal desire and social good was also at the heart of the Greek philosophical tradition. We have already visited Plato's Symposium, but it is worth returning to the final speech in that dialogue, the one given by Socrates. Socrates does not offer his own ideas, but instead recounts a lesson he learned from a mysterious priestess named Diotima. Diotima presents a radical and deeply weird vision of love. She explains that the love we feel for a beautiful person is only the first, lowest rung on a ladder. It is a starting point. A true philosopher, she argues, should use that initial desire as an impetus to move upwards, to appreciate not just one beautiful body, but all beautiful bodies. From there, the lover should learn to appreciate the beauty of a person's soul, which is far more valuable than the beauty of their body. Then, he should progress to appreciating the beauty of laws and institutions, and then the beauty of knowledge and ideas. Finally, by climbing this ladder of love, the individual can arrive at the ultimate goal, a direct, mystical vision of beauty itself, an eternal, perfect, and unchanging form. In this philosophical framework, personal romantic love is not an end in itself. It is a tool. It is the engine that starts the soul on its long intellectual journey toward enlightenment. The love for another person is ultimately something to be transcended. It is a strange and almost cold vision of love, one that strips it of its personal, emotional core and transforms it into a stepping stone for abstract, philosophical contemplation. For Plato, the ultimate love affair was not with another person, but with truth itself. The societies of the Iron Age North, which we explored earlier, also had their own unwritten but rigidly enforced codes. In the Norse world, honor was the paramount virtue, and this extended to the interactions between men and women. The sagas are filled with instances where a perceived insult to a woman demands a violent response from her male relatives. A man could not simply write a love poem to a woman he admired, as a Heian courtier might. Composing a verse about another man's wife or daughter, especially one that was overly familiar or suggestive, could be interpreted as a grave insult, a slander that questioned her honor and, by extension, the honor of her entire family. The penalty for such a transgression was often violent. The poet could be challenged to a duel, the holmgang, or become the target of a blood feud. Love poetry, in this context, was a dangerous game. The concept of marriage itself was bound by these strict social codes. When a man married, he paid a bride price to the bride's father. This was not buying a wife. It was a legal recognition of the transfer of protective authority from her father to her new husband. The wife, in turn, brought a dowry into the marriage, which legally remained her own property. The morning after the wedding, the husband was expected to give his new wife a mourning gift. This was a significant gift of property or wealth that also became her personal possession, a testament to the consummation of the marriage and a measure of her new status. These transactions, the bride price, the dowry, the mourning gift, were the legal and social framework that made the marriage real. They were the rules of the game. A love affair outside of this structure, while it certainly happened, was a dangerous and destabilizing thing, a threat to the intricate web of kinship and property that held their society together. From the cynical strategies of Ovid to the abstract intellectualism of Plato and the honor-bound codes of the sagas, we see societies grappling with the same fundamental problem: how to manage the wild, unpredictable, and powerful force of human love. They created laws to contain it, philosophies to transcend it, and social codes to channel it into acceptable forms. These frameworks, in their own way, are as weird as any of the individual stories we have explored. They reveal a deep human need to make sense of our most powerful emotions, to draw maps for a territory that is, by its very nature, resistant to being mapped. They show us that love has never been a purely private matter. It has always been shaped by the world around it, by the rules, spoken and unspoken, that govern what is possible, what is permissible, and what is forbidden. These ancient codes are a final, quiet reminder that the story of love is also the story of our unending attempt to understand ourselves.